Hey everyone, I'm here with Beth Birmingham and Eeva Sallinen Simard. They're the authors of Creating Cultures of Belonging, Cultivating Organizations Where Women and Men Thrive. Beth is the facilitator for the Christian Alliance for Inclusive Development and also a professor at Eastern University. Eeva is project director at World Relief. Hi, Beth. Hi, Eeva. How are you doing?
Hi
Doing
there.
great. Hi.
I'm glad to have you here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation that we're going to be having today. Why don't you just share briefly with us kind of what you do? And Eeva, why don't you go ahead and start?
Great. I work with World Relief, which is a Christian NGO, and I lead um, a large USAID funded project working in 6 countries around maternal and child health. I am the mom of 2 teenagers,
Mm.
the wife to Renee, and we live in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm originally from Finland, and I've
Oh,
immigrated to the US 20 years ago.
cool. Awesome.
Yeah,
Well, great. Good. Thank you. And Beth, tell us a little bit about what you do.
great. I'm Beth Birmingham, and as you said, I've spent many years teaching and in administration at Eastern University,
Mm.
which is how I became connected to the NGO world. And so for many of those years, was also a consultant for different Christian NGOs. And that's how Ava and
Mm.
I met. Years ago, we worked together for about 4 years on a project developing leaders for World Relief, and have been friends ever since, and
Ah,
collaborated on a number of projects ever since. And that's how this book came about.
very cool. Very cool. Well, I have one more kind of light question before we get into the book conversation. But here's the question: would you rather ride a bike, ride a horse, or drive a car? Uh, Beth, why don't you start?
Ride a bike, just because I
Ride
like
a bike?
the fact that you can explore more places by bike and you have the wind in your hair.
Yeah, that's cool. Do you ride a bike
I
much
do.
or
I
anything?
do.
You do? Oh,
Yeah.
great. Good. Good for you. Good for you. Eva, how about you?
Oh, drive a car.
Yeah.
Uh, Road trips with my family are life, and
Mm.
I cannot wait for our annual road trip to Montreal in a couple of weeks to visit with my husband's family. That is where it's at.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, that'll be
I
fun.
like driving too.
That'll be fun.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, good. Well, let's talk about your book again. The book is called "Creating Cultures of Belonging," and I'd love for you to begin maybe just by sharing with us sort of the problem that the book is addressing. Ava, why don't you begin?
Great. So, as we described, we both have a background in working with what we call missional organizations. Missional are what we describe in the book as religiously inspired,
Hmm.
and in this case, Christian inspired organizations. So, whether they are self identifying as Christian today, they are organizations that were founded on the roots of Christianity.
Hmm.
And it's a little bit blurry how those definitions go because in the US, um, Christian nonprofits can register as churches, and churches can do the work of nonprofits as they serve their communities. So the
Hmm.
identity of these organizations is blurry, but it's really at the heart is that there's some theological foundations that missional organizations have. And so we, as serving these organizations, have seen over the 2 decades that we have been there and knowing the history beyond, women are not well represented in our organizations.
Hmm.
Our organizations serve women and children around the world, and our clients are 70% women and children.
Hmm.
Our staff is 50 to 70% women.
Hmm.
Um, those who donate to our organizations, who make funding decisions for their families, are 70% women.
Hmm.
Um, Yet, uh, only 15% of our executive leadership teams and boards of
Hmm.
directors are women. And in
Hmm.
the largest NGOs, missional NGOs in the US, only 5% are women. So there's a
Hmm.
huge discrepancy between how many women are serving and doing the serving, and
Yeah.
who is leading the organization.
Yeah.
So we really wanted to tackle this issue of women in leadership in missional organizations.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
good.
No, and I completely agree with what Ava shared. The second piece of that and the impetus for the book is that having worked in these different organizations and alongside these organizations, we've seen a disturbing pattern of the style of leadership that is fostered in Christian missional spaces. And it is borrowed too heavily from the industrialized leadership model. And so the idea that serving Jesus means 70-hour work weeks and abandoning your family and not being present in your marriages and your kids' lives. We've adopted a toxic leadership model in missional spaces that completely contradicts the teaching of Scripture, as well as modeling the kingdom of God that we claim to want to represent and reflect around the world. And so it's that very model of leadership that is keeping many men who don't aspire to that kind of toxic workaholism, as well as some extremely talented women, out of the senior leadership roles. And not just senior leadership roles, but even positions of influence. There are many dynamics that go on in Christian missional organizations that diminish or silence women and many men from showing up truly as their authentic selves in that space. And our sector is poorer for it.
I'm curious. I'm sure your concern and passion for this problem, this challenge, this issue comes from probably your own experience in some way. And I would love it if you would be willing to share a little bit of your own experience and how you've run into obstacles and perhaps have surmounted them, or maybe not. I don't know. How have you run up against this challenge?
Yeah, it's an interesting. I actually come from Eastern University, which is a beautifully egalitarian space. And so when I joined Eastern University, Dr. Roberta Hestenes was the president. She was the first president of a Protestant Christian college in the United States, but had a very masculine leadership style. In fact, some of the men there would jokingly say that she was hell on heels. And all I remember thinking is that I could see the flecks of glass in her hair from the glass ceiling that she had burst through. And so there was an expectation that if you're going to be a leader, you had to show up with this very masculine style of leadership. But the reality of that, though, is that you, as a woman, you're condemned for it. So you have to, again, this comes back to the model I was just talking about. You have to show up as strong and like a man. But when you do, you're criticized for being too masculine, too confident, too harsh, because that's not what we expect out of a female, And so women are constantly navigating what Eagly and Carly call the labyrinth, every day. And it's emotional intelligence is the phrase, but it's exhausting. Not emotional intelligence. It's called emotional labor. And it's exhausting because you're constantly wondering, how did I show up? Did I speak up too much? Was I too harsh? So personally experiencing it, not until I started working more closely with a handful of different NGOs. World Vision has always been wonderfully out ahead when it comes to gender equality. Doesn't mean they're perfect, and doesn't mean everybody in the organization experiences that place of belonging. But on the big numbers, on the big metrics, they've always been out ahead. Other organizations are on a journey, and every organization we find is somewhere on the continuum of on a journey. I don't know. Eva, have you experienced, what does it look like in your world?
Well, I wanted to refer to some of the surveys and interviews we did for the book. And so I don't speak to specific organizations, but maybe a composite score would be that many women would report that, we get excited about a woman entering a leadership team.
Mm.
um, a handful of women enter, and then by 12 to 18 months they're exiting.
Hmm.
And there are always these explanations: they weren't a good fit, they failed at some kind of assignment that initially, we even have a term called class cliff assignment, where women are given very, very difficult financial situation or staffing
Mm.
situation to solve, almost like they're just pushed over the cliff, and they
Mm.
cannot succeed because you need more time, more resources. So we saw this as a trend, that many organizations will have this rotating group of women kind of coming in and out, but they do not succeed, and they don't get that tenure that many male colleagues would. That serve on these teams for 5, 7, 10 years, we don't see women staying as long as that. So we really
Mm.
saw that organizations are missing their tools that they
Yeah.
need to really maintain and keep women on their
Mm.
teams.
Mm.
So that's kind of, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And so, sort of the solution, as you presented in the book, is to create a culture of belonging. And I would love for you to unpack, what does that mean, and how do we cultivate that? How do we cultivate a culture of belonging? What does that? But what's that mean first?
So a culture of belonging is it's kind of like the next step from diversity and inclusion.
Mm.
So a lot of organizations want
Mm.
diversity and inclusion. It's a season of that is often birthed out of, a lot of the situations we're seeing around our country, around racial discrimination, the Me
Mhm.
Too movement. We see
Mhm.
a lot of injustice around that,
Mm.
us, and organizations want to have a response, but they don't know how to go about it. So there can be this moment in our organizations where we suddenly invite people. We say, okay, come, we recruit a woman of color, we recruit women onto the leadership team, or we set up a diversity council, or we get a diversity and inclusion officer. And these are
Yeah.
like some like little band-aid solutions we try to come up with. But without this step from inclusion to belonging,
Mm.
these folks will not succeed, because
Mm.
belonging is the acceptance that who these people are as they enter through our doors allow to change us. They
Yeah.
allow to change our organization. They're
Mhm.
not just coming in to sit around this table and do business as usual,
Yeah.
and assimilate into what's happening in the. We are inviting them
Yeah.
because we want them to change us.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
know that the homogenous leadership group and thinking that's going on here will not be the thinking we need to solve the problems of the next 10 years. As
Mm.
we see those problems around us, we need diversity.
Yeah.
But in order to really benefit from diversity, we have to we have to get comfortable with the
Mm.
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And those conversations that rub us the wrong way, that woman who is very assertive, or that person who's bringing this new voice to the table,
Mhm.
we need to get comfortable with that feeling it brings us. And if we do, that is the work of belonging. If we
Mm.
can truly welcome people, that is belonging right
That's
there.
great.
Yeah.
That's great. Beth, anything you want to add to that in terms of culture of belonging, what that means, cultivating that?
No, I think that was so well said,
Yeah.
and it's not just about women. It's also
Mm.
many men who may not lead or work with that same industrial workaholic
Right.
posture,
Yep.
but also want to have a voice around the table and also
Yeah.
want to be valued for their uniqueness and the fact that they're a
Yeah.
father and the fact
Yeah.
that they don't want to miss their kids' baseball games. And that doesn't mean they're any
Yeah.
less committed to their workplace. It
Mhm.
means
Mhm.
that, God has created many spheres in their life and we should cherish and celebrate that, the
Yeah.
fullness of who they are.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's great. I love what you were saying, Eva, about the distinction between inclusion and belonging. Um, Yeah, I was reflecting on that. Inclusion seems to be something that we do for you, like we will include you, but belonging means like I belong. I'm a part
Mhm.
of this. I'm integral, right, to this, rather
Mhm.
than we got our group and okay, we'll include you. There's anyway, there's
Right.
something much deeper about belonging, and then I also appreciate Beth what you're saying, that it's for men as well, and
Mhm.
I imagine people of color and all kinds of
Mhm.
all those that wouldn't necessarily be at the drive to the core of an
Exactly.
organization.
Exactly.
Um,
Mhm.
what can organizations do? Like so, and you talk a lot about the kinds of things that we can do. What are some of the things that you would highlight that organizations can do to create a culture of belonging?
Well, and I think this is where, the reason for the book. So what, as Ava alluded to, when we see these different crises happen, and you can take that same concept to other countries as well, when there's
Mm,
tribal outbreaks in Africa and others, there's always an us and a them. And so when we
mm,
saw the Me Too movement happen, and everybody rushes to solve that problem by making, declarative statements. When we saw Black Lives
mm,
Matter occur, organizations wanted to rush to say that, they're an advocate for racial
mm,
diversity, but they don't
yeah.
put as much time necessarily into thinking, what does that actually mean for how we have to change the way we do business in our organization? And part of it's
Hmm.
because these are systemic issues. They're deeply rooted in DNA of an
Yeah.
organizational culture, and in order to change systemic problems, you need a systems approach. So
Hmm.
the two
Mm,
low hanging fruit that everybody rushed for, they hired a diversity and inclusion officer. And we won't mention the fact that they didn't give them any budget or any staff to do any real impact.
mhm.
Or they put everybody through diversity training, bias training, helping you recognize your biases. And again, then are frustrated a year or two later that the same problems persist. And so
Yeah.
these one off activities are not the answer. You do have to approach a systemic problem with a
Mm,
systems mindset. And so that's what the book
yeah.
really does. We talk in the Christian space about having to address the Imago Dei. Do we believe that
Hmm.
women and men, that people of color and white people, do we believe all are created in God's image? And if so, do we believe that they're called for His purposes and equipped for that calling, whether it's the CEO seat or any other seat? So making that declarative statement and communicating it through the organization, but then
Yeah.
also examining what is the culture of our organization. Are the way that leaders are socialized by going out on the basketball court, the golf course, the bike paths, are men the only ones getting socialized and targeted for senior leadership
Mm,
roles?
hmm.
Um, there's a lot of the problems that do reside in HR policies and practices that can be
Yeah.
examined. Anything from throwing the net for when you start hiring a position all
Mm,
the way through to retirement. There are pockets all along the way in which need to be examined for how are we biasing one group
mm,
over another. And
mm,
then intentional development. So we know from corporate research that the majority of leadership development dollars are spent towards men in organizations, and usually
mm.
predominantly the ones all the way at the top of the chart, which I always think, why are
Right.
you wasting your leadership development dollars? They're already at the vice president
Already
level. They're
there.
fully
Yeah.
baked,
Right.
Spend it
Right.
on the 25-year-old woman who needs extra pouring in to get her on the first leadership rung, because that's the
Mm,
missing, the missing link
yeah.
on the ladder, and why we're not
Mm,
filling our pipelines with the amazing, talented young women in
yeah.
organizations. And so
Yeah.
you really do need to identify and look at the different aspects of your organization to start
Hmm.
to address it. And the book goes into, then details in each one of those things
Yeah.
with questions to ask leaders at each spot. But ultimately,
Yeah.
it's going to come down to the last one that we talk about, which is leadership will.
Mm,
Men do tend to get uncomfortable when we start to talk about diversity and inclusion in organizations, because the first question is, what does it mean for me?
mm,
No matter
yeah.
how godly we all are, we do seem to be wired for self interest.
Yep.
And so if she's going to get that job, then I'm not going to get it. If she's
Right.
going to get that promotion, then I'm not going to get it. And so
Right.
having to tackle the hard question of self-interest and
Yep.
recognizing that for 75 years, the faith-based development sector has been a biased sector towards
Mm-hmm.
hiring, promoting, and elevating men. And that's the reason they're getting their promotions and their jobs, not
Yep.
necessarily because they were the better performer, but they get to
Yeah.
live and dwell in a biased system.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Eeva, what would you say in terms of some of the ways? Maybe you can, if you want to dig a little deeper into one or two of these. How do we create cultures of belonging? Maybe some specific ideas or practices we can implement.
Great. I think the most key probably to missional organization, these are all important, but the one that's missing from the mainstream models, if you look at, we call it gender mainstreaming, which is the systemic that you go at everything at the same time. It's not a special project. It's a project that surpasses all of your important areas in your organization.
Mm-hmm.
And but for what's missing in the mainstream tools and methods is theology.
Mm.
And for us to organizationally address theology from the beginning is the key
Mm.
to starting to unlock this,
Mm.
because all of us are sitting in our church pews and socialized by a theology somehow. And if
Mm-hmm.
we are being learning a theology that puts women just a little bit lower than men as that
Yeah.
helpmate, as we often do, um, without organization addressing that, people are going to walk in through the front doors of your organization with that theology and that
Mm.
mindset.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of left, do you have a manager that thinks that way? Or do you have a manager who has an egalitarian view to women?
Mm.
And it
Mm-hmm.
should not be left to the individual manager's discretion how they're addressing this issue, but an organization has to make a declarative statement
Yeah.
about what Beth said, Imago Dei,
Yeah.
that if we do agree that all men and women are created and empowered by God to be
Yeah.
leaders,
Yeah.
then that is the theology we will be also implementing in this organization.
Yeah.
And there are many organizations that do not believe that women are equipped to lead,
Yeah.
and that's fine. That's their prerogative, but they should be forthcoming with that information.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
They should not be recruiting talented women year over year just to
Right.
disappoint them because they will not be VP or director. Be front,
Yeah.
front
Right.
about that fact, and release the women.
Mm.
Um, you know, it's you're holding on to someone's talent, best years of work, and they're never going to make those steps into the
Yeah.
leadership roles. Release them if that's where you're
Yeah.
theologically going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. Just to be honest, right? Be honest about where you stand, and stand wherever you want to, but just say
Yeah.
this is where we stand. I like that. I appreciate that. Um, and it seems that if you are going to be as a leader, if you're going to be the kind of leader that creates space and belonging for all kinds of voices, all kinds of people, all kinds of backgrounds, including and women. Um, you talked about leadership will, Beth, and there seems to be a need for some kind of character, like a certain kind of character, inner character. And you talk about in the book, you talk about dying to our own agendas, which
Yeah.
is really
Mhm.
hard.
Yeah. Yeah. It
I'll
really
share
is.
just
It really is.
transparently, real quick. I'm a white guy, and I hadn't for most of my life thought about most of these kinds of things. And I had a moment of clarity when President at Fuller, this podcast is Fuller Seminary's Church Leadership Institute podcast. And when Mark Labberton, the president, announced his resignation, I was like, wow, it made me feel old, first of all. Every time another president resigns, I feel older. But I thought, I bet you that our next president won't be a white male. And I was excited about that. And in the same moment, I thought, oh, that means I would be out of the running. Not that I'm trying to be president of Fuller Seminary, but it was like this moment of like, what does this mean for me then? Right. And so anyway, that was very clarifying for me to kind of recognize, oh, I see what's going on inside me here. Right. But maybe you can talk a little bit about dying to our agendas and the importance of that. Beth, maybe you can share.
One of the interesting things in the research that we came across was, everybody wants the magic bullet about what do we train people with to fix this, And of course, I have a PhD in leadership and change, so I want to teach leadership stuff. Lo and behold, one of the things that some Harvard research has found is coming back to good old-fashioned ethics, teaching people to do the right thing and to be asking that very question that you just asked yourself. Oh, wait, I did ask myself, what does this mean for me? And you recognize that maybe there's a little self-interest in that. And women do it too. We all do it. I mean, it's part of our sinful nature. So I do tend to see everything through an optimistically spiritual lens. And I've been told that I'm too much of an idealist. But the thing that I keep coming back to is God has called you to this work that you're doing today. He has used you in amazing ways. And if you start to advocate for women, if you start to be the sponsor in the room, speaking up for female colleagues, and maybe they start going for jobs that you would have wanted to go after, do you really think that God's going to just completely sideline you and ignore you from that point on? Don't you think he wants to see us championing for each other and moving our organizations and our teams and our departments towards reflecting his kingdom, which is a diversity around the table? And when he sees you doing that as white guy, don't you think that brings joy to his heart? Don't you think he's going to say, you know what? He is bypassing applying for a vice presidency, but I am going to pour out an abundance of blessing on him in some other way. We are not discarded from the kingdom and his plan when we decide to move in this direction. And so this concept that it's a zero-sum game. If Eeva gets the role and I don't, then my life is, I won't use that word. My life is rubbish. And, no, that's not how God's economy works. If I am a supporter of Eeva, if I am for her, I'm praying she gets the role that I want, he's going to turn around and bless my socks off with something else I didn't see coming. And I do have a lifetime of experiences of exactly that, of seeing that, a disappointment today, God turns into some amazing blessing tomorrow. And I can only see that in hindsight. So this whole notion of dying to self, when God sees us humble ourselves, and actually living into our prayer, thy kingdom come, Lord, thy will be done. When he sees that, he's going to turn around and pour out his hand of blessing in some other way. And we have to trust that. How can we call ourselves citizens of the kingdom if that fundamental faith isn't there?
Yeah. That's good. Eeva, anything you want to add about dying to our own agendas?
There's a short little section in the book around legacy, and I think like rethinking our legacy. And I think there's this, we're kind of stuck in this paradigm of like, especially in the missional, growing and more dollars and more people served and in churches. more people coming through. Those are the legacy numbers but actually, you know, by a switch of a click,
Hmm.
that can change. The
Yeah.
next tsunami can come and wipe it all out, or the next
Mm.
COVID comes and wipes all of our great accomplishments.
Yeah.
And, if we started to look at legacy really as like how we made others feel, how we invested in individual other leaders, how we poured
Hmm.
our lives, and who will remember us as he was a really great leader because of
Mm.
the investment he put in me. What
Right.
if that was our metric for success and a legacy?
Mm. Yeah.
How would we live our lives completely differently if
Yeah.
if that was our measure of success
Yeah.
versus bigger, better, brighter
Right.
as it is right now? And we
Right.
just need a switch in this paradigm.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Yeah.
so good. Yeah. Um, well, the book is amazing, and so much great, tangible, like practical, content. Just to help leaders, help churches, help organizations, missional organizations, begin to live this out, and some really great stuff you've shared this morning. One last question. It's not morning for me or you. It's afternoon. Anyway, but one last question is that, for all the women who are listening right now, what would you say to them? What words of advice or encouragement would you give them?
Um, so I say this, and I always drum this. I say this with my team all the time
Hmm.
because um, a wise CEO says to us, a friend of Beth's and I, that we are all more than one thing.
Hmm.
And an identity that's based only on our career success is just a
Hmm.
marred identity.
Yeah.
And for me, it was so releasing when I became a mom and I had very many multiple responsibilities.
Hmm.
And I realized that I can only keep this up if I really fully lean into who God has created me to be.
Hmm.
If I try to keep up some kind of a facade of a strong leader, and I don't lean into my I'm quite my leadership style is quite feminine, and I'm soft, and I have a soft way about me, and it became clear to me that God wants me to lead in that way.
Hmm.
And I'm leading a serious big project. It's not that
Hmm.
I'm, you know, working at some kind of a, I mean, it's hard work, but I do it in my way because I believe that God put in me certain skills and abilities, his giftings for me that he wants me to lead from. And so I say to women, and I encourage my team members, know who you are and lead from those places.
Hmm.
God doesn't need all of us to be some prototype over there.
Right.
He has created us this way for his purposes, and we're sinning if we are not leaning into the things that he has put
Mhm.
in us. So
Yeah.
that's what I would say to women
Yeah.
listening. Really don't shy away from the things God has put in you.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Yeah.
good. Beth, anything you would say?
So I would. We wrote the book for women and men. So if I think about
Hmm.
what I would really love men to take away from this,
Hmm.
is the reality that, and coming back to Eva's comment about legacy,
Hmm.
um, the hard reality is if you've lived long enough in the development sector, you've lived long enough to see our work come and go. So wonderful communities transformed, and a dictator steps in, and the work is gone. A tsunami hits, and your housing is gone. You know,
Hmm.
it's just a cyclical reality to the work that we do. There is one thing you can do in your organizations, and it's
Hmm.
changing the culture of the organization towards a belonging culture that
Yeah.
will never be wiped away. It
Hmm.
will set the organization on a course for greater performance, greater
Yeah.
innovation, greater employee retention, greater talent attraction, all of the good things that we want for our organizations if you tackle this one thing. And don't let the next earthquake get in the way of this. Don't let the next financial meltdown get in the way of this, because you'll be able to better address the next earthquake, the next financial meltdown, when you have created a better culture and have talented, diverse leadership around your organization's tables. That's a legacy no storm, no financial meltdown will ever be able to wipe away. And then coming back to the fear, lean into it. Recognize that we all operate on self-interest. But start asking yourself the question, what does it mean as the follower of Jesus Christ to die to self for the sake of creating an organization that reflects more the kingdom of God than the one that we work in today?
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good. So again, the book is called Creating Cultures of Belonging. And if people wanted to find out more about you and your work and the book, where can you send them? Where can they go? Yeah.
LinkedIn is a great place under our names, and also Instagram is also a great places to find what we're up to.
The book's available.
And just search for your names.
Yeah, the book's available on Amazon. You can get it directly from InterVarsity, all the regular book sellers. And then Eeva and I are both part of a project called the Christian Alliance for Inclusive Development. And so you can find that at the-christianalliance.org. And it's creating a network of women and men who do, in fact, want to see dramatic change come to the development sector.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. So good, so helpful, and such a blessing. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks.